Thank you, Mark. And thank you to Rachel for holding the tech space today. It's good. It's always good to be with you, especially today. And I want to pause and kind of start our time together by reflecting on the multiple cycles that we're going through right now in the Jewish calendar, and to call our attention to that. As we may know, we have our familiar Torah portion cycle that unites us as a community kind of around the globe, that when we walk into a synagogue anywhere in the world, or we focus on a period of study over the course of a week, we're united through the division of the parshiot, the Torah portions. But there's another cycle that's going on as well. And we're in the middle of a 7-week, or near the beginning of a 7-week cycle, as we're climbing up that spiritual ascent from the Leider in our calendar of Tisha B'Av, the fast of the 9th of Av, which was observed in our calendar just over a week ago. And it's a 7-week cycle as we trace the steps towards Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, sustained time of moving from mourning and suffering to reconnecting and healing. And so this 7-week cycle that we're in as a Jewish people can also be a cycle that can hold us and wherever we are in our own lives with mourning, with the need to heal and to be comforted. So one of the ways that this cycle is marked in our tradition is by having 7 prophetic readings known as a haftarah or haftarot in plural that are accompanying the reading of the Torah during these 7 weeks on Shabbat. And so each Shabbat we have one of these special haftarot that are not necessarily linked to our Torah portion. They're linked to this 7-week pilgrimage that we're making of comfort. It's a 7-week opportunity to acknowledge the trauma and the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, both temples that we commemorated on Tisha B'Av. In Aramaic, these 7 Shabbatot, or 7 Shabbases, as we might say, are called Sheva de Nechemta, the 7 Shabbases, or the 7 Shabbat Sabbaths of comfort. So it's interesting in our medieval commentaries, for hundreds of years, this conversation has been going on to talk about how the order of these haftarot might actually be personal consolers to us, offering kind of personal words of comfort. So in particular, there's one commentary known as the Machzor Vitri, and it's actually just a very interesting opportunity to lift up the name of this particular volume, because Machzor is also the name of the prayer book that we use on the High Holy Days. It comes from the root chazar, which means to turn, to return. We think of teshuva as being another significant word that is a part of our High Holy Day liturgy in the process of turning back to the divine during this time in the calendar. But the Machzor is literally the book that helps us return, as it were. So the Machzor Vitri, this medieval collection of liturgical commentary and kind of helping us understand the prayers in our tradition better, talks about these haftarot as being personal consolers, and thinking that each of the opening lines of these readings over 7 weeks can be thought of taking mourning in various stages, beginning with the very simple and important and elegant opening that we had last Shabbat, Nachamu, Nachamu Ami, that we are a people in need of comfort. And the prophet opens up with those words on the Shabbat that comes right after the lowest part in our calendar. So, and then it ascends through the calendar to greater levels of comfort as we approach the high holy days. One of our great IJS teachers, Rabbi Sheila Peltz-Weinberg, wrote about this time of year in her beautifully woven piece entitled The Torah of Corona. And what she did is she took these amazing reflections that she had written on the various Torah portions in the times of the year. She'd written this during the lockdown during COVID, and she wove them into a beautiful liturgical poem of its own, I really think. And I want to share a brief excerpt of that. So, Rachel, if you can share this screen with the text for today, and I'll be reading everything out loud, so you don't need to worry if you can't see that. But I'll just start again. It's a very eloquent, longer piece, but it's just truly beautiful. She writes, consolation, and here she's talking about the consolation of this period in our calendar. Consolation arises with perspective. The realization of impermanence and vulnerability held with kindness and care fertilizes consolation and allows it to grow. I'm going to read that one more time just to let it sink into our hearts a bit. Consolation arises with perspective. The realization of impermanence and vulnerability held with kindness and care fertilizes consolation and allows it to grow. So this period of these 7 weeks between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah are not only a time of consolation, but also a time of perspective, a time when we are reminded that we are impermanent, we are vulnerable. And it's such a beautiful image that through our kindness and our care toward ourselves and toward others, that we literally, in the words of Sheila here, we fertilize consolation, like comfort during these days, like it grows as we move through this 7-week period. So Sheila's mention for me, her mention of impermanence was really brought home for me during these 7 weeks, because it echoes for me an opening section of our Yizkor memorial service that we'll chant on Yom Kippur, where it says, humans are as a breath, their days are like a passing shadow, right? This is what Sheila's reminding us of when we read this reflection on this time of the year. And then I would like to link that sense of impermanence we also find it rooted in our portion itself. And I'm going to grab a story that I want to share with you. Speaking of impermanence, as books move around my study here. So in the portion, we have this verse, one that might be familiar to us because it repeats in many different places in the Torah. You too must love the resident alien, for you were resident aliens in the land of Egypt. Now, we might ask ourselves, what is a resident alien when we're looking at this English translation here? The Hebrew is ger, which is often translated as stranger. But what's the difference between you must love the stranger versus the resident alien? And there are a lot of technical reasons in the tradition that I won't go into today for that. But there is this sense that when we are, or someone is a resident alien, that they're in a place for a brief period of time. They are living there. They are maybe thriving, but it's temporary. It's not, they might not be quite a stranger, but they're there for a brief sojourn, right? Or brief period of time. And so one of the beautiful Hasidic commentators raises this question of what does it mean for us to re-envision ourselves as resident aliens, right? To kind of think we must love ourselves who are impermanent and here for a fleeting time. We are that we have that identity. We are that person, which might be a hard thing for us to grasp, or maybe an unpleasant thing for us to grasp. So there's a brief story that I want to share before we head into our period of sit that kind of lifts this up and talks about this. Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polonia, the Bala Todot, visited the house of the great Maggid Rabbi Dov Ber of Mezrich. When he walked in, the house was noticeably poor in every single way. A stool served as a chair, a wooden crate was the only table. So Rabbi Yaakov asked the Maggid, "Where's your furniture?" And the Maggid replied with a question himself, "And where is your furniture?" The Bala Toldo was astonished. "My furniture, well, I'm only here as a passing visitor. My furniture is at home." The Maggid replied, "So too am I, just a passing visitor in this world." This idea that the Maggid was really living his life, really holding in every moment through his poverty in this case as well, the fact that his life wasn't permanent, that things weren't permanent. And I don't think the story's meant to be taken literally, that we all have to live in poverty in our physical conditions in order to have that awareness. But it's illustrative of how we might approach the things that are around us. What is physical here in this moment, and what is going to fall away, and what is not lasting. And indeed, when we sit in meditation, our breath is representative of that impermanence too, right? It comes, it goes, it arises, and it falls away. It has its own cycle, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it doesn't last, right? It is totally passing through us, does not stay. It is not fixed. And so our meditation, the actual act of breathing, is a reminder of our impermanence that is heightened during this season of comfort. And yet with the bewildering feeling that nothing lasts forever, right? For some of us, that we want to hold tight to that. And yet this season is a reminder to us to not, that that's an illusion, I guess I would say. So I want to just repeat as a kavanah, as an intent for us before we sit together, Sheila's words from her reflection on this season. Impermanence and vulnerability held with kindness and care fertilizes consolation and allows it to grow. This is our opportunity to hold ourselves with kindness and care, to fertilize through our quiet together. So we'll sit for the next 10 minutes together in the presence of each other to nurture that fertilization. As we return to the anchor of our breath over and over, that anchor of impermanence, we hold Rabbi Sheila Peltz Weinberg's words in our hearts and our bodies as we move through this 7-week period. Impermanence and vulnerability held with kindness and care fertilizes consolation and allows it to grow.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Susan Leider. And friends, let's seal that beautiful teaching and practice today, as we do each day, offering opportunity for those of you who are in mourning or observing a yard site to, or if it's your custom to join in the Kaddish, to do so. Please, if you're not reciting Kaddish, if you could stay present for those who are, that would be much appreciated. To continue with your practice, to stay present. You can put the name or names of those that you are honoring in the chat. And if you're joining me in Kaddish, please rise in body or in spirit, and you can unmute at this time. Yitgadal, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Yamad, Yibrach, Yibutei, V'yamlich Malchutei, Chayechon, V'yamechon, V'chayei D'chol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agalah, V'zman Kariv. Amen. Hey, Shmei Rabba Mevarach, Le'olam V'lamei Aliyah, Yibarach V'yishtabach, Ar V'yitramam V'yitzei, Yitadar V'yitaleh V'yitpalal Shemei Dekudsha B'richus, La'ela Mikol Birchata V'Shivata, Ushbechata V'nechemata, Ba'amiram Ba'alma, V'imru Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Mimshaya Chaim Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael, V'imru Amen. Yoseh Shalom B'mema, Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael, Al Kol Yoshvei Tevel V'imru Amen. Friends, thanks for joining us today. May those who are in mourning, those honoring memories of loved ones, all those who are named in the chat, may they be a source of blessing for those who are mourning them. And thank you for honoring their memories today. Friends, you're welcome to stay on as always, to either just to continue to use our time and space to sit together. You can turn the sound off on your device and use this time for your own practice with the support of our community, or join us for a conversation with Rabbi Susan Leider for a few minutes. Just a reminder, if you're leaving us, hope you join us tomorrow. We'll be led by Rabbi Marcelo Bronstein. He'll be joining us from Costa Rica tomorrow. And on Friday, Rabbi Lauren Tuckman will lead us into practice to sit in Shabbat together. If you have a question for Rabbi Leider, please put it in the chat, and I'll keep an eye out for that. And if you can preface any questions just by writing question all in caps, would be great. Susan, thank you so much. Really brought us deeply into where we are at this juncture in the Jewish calendar. One of the things, I don't know about you, I imagine you do too, but one of the things I really appreciate about having this almost daily practice together is the way in which we can move day by day through the nuances of this year. And I'd love for us just to stay with that beautiful passage from Rabbi Sheila Peltz Weinberg, who is a beautiful teacher for many of us. And for those of you who are familiar with her teaching or work, I would highly recommend Sheila's books and recordings. So I wanted to see if we can bring that back up on the screen for a minute. Rachel, if you have it handy, if not, I think I can share it. I got it. Okay. I almost feel like I would love to um, do shared commentary on this, like the Rashi on this. Um, it's just a short passage, but it is full of wisdom. Um, and we're in the section of Av, known as Menachem Av, it's time of comfort. And as you pointed out, that's the theme of the Haftarot on Shabbat, on these Shabbatot. So I'm just going to ask you some questions here. If that's okay. Um, is consolation to you the same as comfort? Number one. You
So
think
I
they're
spent
similar?
I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I think my Rashi, my commentary on Sheila's wisdom here was there was a part of me that craved hearing the word comfort
Mm-hmm.
instead of consolation. There's something about the word in English that I just find a little more intimate.
Mm-hmm.
And comfort to me can be like a blanket, just
Mm-hmm.
less personified. I think that's what consolation in indicates there's a consoler, I guess. And like you could say the word thing about comfort and comforter as well. But I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, there's just even the way the word sounds in English, like comfort is so much softer than console.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I found, so that was one thing that happened to me. And as I was reflecting on the first line of this excerpt, I really got drawn into the last three lines even more. Um, Especially drawn to the word impermanence. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but that's what happened to me too with the opening line of the consolation, comfort. What do I want? What do I need? What's in the tradition? It's an interesting question.
Yeah. Okay. So there's that. And now I'm just going really slowly here. Perspective. And I'm also translating this into our practice that what we're doing sitting here is we are cultivating perspective, which uh, almost is like, cultivating insight, seeing what is really true, looking more closely, and seeing a bigger picture at the same time. So I want to, before we move on, how about that? Perspective and the connection between that and, let's say, comfort or consolation. Let's just use comfort. Um, that this is a time for cultivating perspective, seeing things as they truly are, including in the big picture of things, before we even move on to the next couple of lines. And I don't mean to get too intellectual about it here. I'm
No?
thinking about like, and it jives with the Torah portions too, because of course Moses is coming to the end of his life, right, and making peace with it, letting go, seeing the bigger picture, right, climbing to the top of the mountain to see the bigger picture, which is what we're doing here as well. I
Right.
don't know if you want to add anything to that,
Yeah,
yeah.
I would love to because and this is part of a deeper teaching from the Mahzor Vitri about these seven opening
Mm-hmm.
lines of the Haftarot being in dialogue with each other.
Mm,
And so we didn't have time for that today, but I think it raises, and when I've been teaching this, especially lately, it raises the question of, is 7 weeks too long or not long enough? Right. And so it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about your own personal cycle of
mm,
mourning or loss around a specific thing in your life, I'm reflecting on the hostages, grateful to those who mentioned their names in the chat, thinking 7 weeks, that's not enough to hold like the grief that we've been
mhm,
experiencing over, right, almost this past year. So I think that the perspective maybe is in the eye of the beholder, right? Like,
mhm,
how
mhm,
much do we want or need? Um, And how much do we push away, right? Like we don't like not wanting to face that reality. I mean, that might be
right,
part of feeling like, oh, this 7 week period is too long. Like, let's get on with it, right? Or how we might feel in Shiva or Shloshim, the
right.
30-day cycle that follows our 7-day mourning period. So I think there's interesting, this perspective is it's loaded. Is it
Right,
a welcome, is it a guest that's welcome in the house or not? Think of the guest house, right? The Rumi poem or
right,
uh
right.
no answers there, just
Yeah,
further musings.
yeah. Okay, so let's go to the next line. The realization, and here we might also say the awareness, cultivating awareness of impermanence. And you invited us to experience the coming and going of each breath, the inhalation, exhalation, as an expression of impermanence, um, and vulnerability. And I think there Sheila is inviting us to touch into that where we would actually, where we're not inclined to go. We're not inclined to go there. It's uncomfortable to go there. And so line 3 requires kindness and care.
Hmm.
Here too, it's just interesting. And I don't know what Sheila would make of us breaking
I
this
think
in
she would
word by
love
word.
this. She would
Okay.
love this, Mark, that we're doing the
Well,
Rashi on her
well,
wisdom.
we're doing it. So it's interesting to me to use two words that are so closely related and invites to say, like, what's the connection? What's the distinction between impermanence, which I'm just going to share for me when I read that, I think, oh, yes, that is true. Everything material is impermanent. Oh, that's uncomfortable. That's painful. There's grief. Vulnerability is inviting me to acknowledge that reality that I and nothing else is invulnerable. We are vulnerable. We are exposed. We are um, not not fully in control, and but that we can go there if we are held or hold ourselves with kindness, you might say with chesed, right, or rachamim, and care. That's interesting. Like when you go back to consolation, I was thinking of, and you were talking about a comforter, literally like a blanket, a comforter, right? Um, which is feels different than a consoler, which in some ways almost implies for me like pity or something. But a comforter is like there's more empathy there. I'm with you. So community, held with kindness. We can do this. We can go to this place. We can acknowledge our fears. And
One
then
of the,
she's, go
yeah,
ahead.
one of the things I'm struck by though, that I struggled with when I was looking at this and the not and wanting to look away is comfort for me would be maybe in my most honest moments. I want permanence, right? I want
Hmm.
someone to say like everything's going to be okay always.
Hmm.
um, and so I was kind of struggling with this, like how can comfort come when the answer is there's impermanence? Because that means comfort, by the way, is also impermanent, right? It's not,
Hmm.
but when I think about kindness and care, her words here, those things could be permanent, right? Like in other words, they're always out there. They're
Hmm.
accessible to us. Perhaps that's a hard thing to imagine. Um, in other words, comfort would be I'm comfortable. I have the answers I want. But
Hmm.
kindness and care has to do with, okay, when you face that, as you've mentioned this before, those things can be a stalwart presence with you. That's what we do in
Hmm.
meditation, right?
Hmm.
So I don't know, I found the third line to be like a great balm
Yeah.
when I think
Calmness is the
about
word. Hmm.
I'm not going to get what I want, right? I'm not
Right.
not going to get what comfort is not getting what I want all the
Right.
time.
Right. It's that Sylvia Boorstein sweetheart, um, heart on the hand, offering that loving comfort. That's beautiful. And I saw in the chat, yeah, this invitation or request for podcast to help with grieving, relationship separation. And I think that I don't have I myself don't have an answer about podcasts. Maybe we can crowdsource that if people have ideas there. But This is speaking about, this is uh, addressing grief in general, and you could apply it to the specifics of, loss of any kind. Um, that the way we meet loss, which is a recognition that everything's impermanent, that we're vulnerable, we allow ourselves to be vulnerable because we hold ourselves and hold each other with kindness and care, and that um, strengthens consolation or comfort. That helps it grow. I love that. I love that. That the key ingredient to fertilize consolation is kindness and care. And anyone who's been to a Shiva house and been the recipient of comfort or has given it knows that the authenticity of the kindness and care that is offered is exactly that. That's the key ingredient to fertilize consolation or comfort and allow it to grow and to take root in some way.
In its best manifestation, right, in the Jewish tradition,
Mm-hmm.
right, without the kind of papering over of theology or everything's going to be okay, or
Right.
the words that we sometimes are tempted to, not tempted, that well up in us, that we want to take away the pain or help people feel better.
Mm-hmm.
I the podcast question is an interesting one too, because it occurs to me that any of the IJS podcast offerings, as you just said, Mark, are going to be applicable to Greek, right? Like we have it embedded in Shiva, the 7 days morning, in Shloshim, the 30 days, in this 7 week cycle that we have now, right? Like it's in so many places in the tradition. And so I risk here doing an IJS commercial, but I think that a lot
Oh,
of this is
please.
bring it on, Susan, right? Yeah, I just think a lot of that is in those podcasts. I would urge all of us to, to look there for models that can be brought into other areas of our life. Um, it's everywhere around us, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, since you brought Sheila into this, just really want to lift up, I think, because I think one of the, what makes a wonderful mindfulness teacher, I think, is not just the kind of the technique, but actually the embodiment and manifestation of kindness and care that Sheila is speaking about, which she and her teacher Sylvia Borstein really represent, and that lineage hopefully is passed down, through this IJS, network, and as much as this is a season for, of grieving loss, of really letting ourselves, as Alan Liu invites us to, like, let the walls fall down, let the tears flow on the ninth of Av, and then to receive comfort, and that this is really a season of kindness and care, which that's my takeaway from what you're bringing to us today, is that kind of to double down on, as if this is just one big Shiva house that we're in for 7 weeks, right? And offering each other that kind of comfort and care, without, like you said, without rationalization, without analysis, without fixing, without denying, without, look on the bright side.
Right. And also noticing that even when we ascend out of it as a community at Rosh Hashanah, that there will be people who will not be with us, right? Like,
Right.
and that's okay, because people's cycles are different, right? And I think we even have this with the annual cycle of forgiveness, that, Yom Kippur, some would say Sukkot, or Hoshana Rabbah, later points in our calendar that it kind of culminates. And I think it's important for us to realize these cycles are here as a reference point, as a framing device for us, but kind of walking through the world. And, Rabbi Sharon Brous has said this really beautifully in her book, The Amen Effect, right? That walking through the world saying, we really don't know what's going on with people internally,
Mm-hmm.
what they're carrying. And so the cycles are both helpful, and they're also not meant to be taken literally.
Yeah.
Like we're going to wake up on Rosh Hashanah and the morning will
Right.
be gone,
Right.
right?
Right. Well, like you pointed out, we've got Yisker on Yom Kippur, right? So um, it's not totally linear. All right, we're at time, slightly over time. Susan, as always, really such a pleasure to get a chance to learn from you and practice with you, and so appreciative of all you've done for this community over this time. So thank you so much, as always.
Thank you, Mark. Take care all.
Take care, everyone. We'll hope to see you tomorrow to practice with Rabbi Marcelo Bronstein. Be well, everyone. Thanks to Rachel for holding our space, each of you for being here. See you tomorrow.